Hello and welcome to the Atlas Liberty Forum here in the Polish capital of Warsaw. I'm delighted to be joined by 12 IEA staffers who have been here for a week, participating in trainings and engaging in important discussions. And in the next couple of minutes, I will walk you through a couple of interviews and engagements with them to talk about trade policy, to talk about Putin, and to talk about the classical liberal values that the IEA stands for. So join me and my IEA colleagues on this journey, and let's get going. We just finished an excellent session with Victoria Houston, the head of regulatory affairs at the IEA, about free trade in Europe and beyond. And we are here in Warsaw, surrounded by our continental European friends. So there was quite a bit of back and forth when it comes to the bilateral relationship between the EU and the UK. And a lot of our continental friends are pretty annoyed by the fact that it's a lot more difficult to conduct business with the United Kingdom now than it was 2 years ago. So how do you see the relationship developing in the near future? Is there anything that we can do to make trade easier between the continent and the UK?
Well, the good thing is that the government is already, perhaps more of necessity than of choice, actually pursuing some quite good unilateral measures to continue to allow EU goods into this country without imposing onerous border checks and veterinary checks on them as they come into this country. As I say, this is more by accident than design, but it's very welcome nonetheless. And the great opportunity that, in fact, I think Jacob Rees-Mogg, one of the ministers concerned with this issue, has said that they might even roll this new light touch border operating model out to goods from elsewhere in the world, which would be a fantastic opportunity and could genuinely be a world-leading example by the British government, which is not something that I've been able to say very much recently.
So maybe trade will not only become easier with the EU, but also with the rest of the globe. That would be a very welcome endeavor.
Yes, and this is, I hesitate to use the cliched expression global Britain, but this could actually be a way of really moving towards that. Perhaps not in the way that people had expected, by way of free trade agreements and bilaterals and WTO reforms, but actually just by doing the right thing with our domestic settings.
A slightly more difficult topic because it divides the free market libertarian camp quite a bit. Economic sanctions on Russia. Obviously, they have a lot of trade ramifications as well. Russia is an incredibly autocratic and aggressive country, so there is a geopolitical need to do something. But are we doing it right when it comes to economic sanctions, or we're just hindering trade and harming ourselves at the end of the day?
Well, I think you sort of hit on it when you said there's a need to do something. And perhaps it almost doesn't matter too much whether the something will work and have positive effects. I certainly support sending military aid to Ukraine. I think that's important, and I'm very happy and proud that the British government seems to be leading the way on that. But as regards the economic sanctions, some of it I felt really quite uncomfortable with, the sanctions on wealthy Russians and their families in Britain. Without recourse to due process. It's essentially expropriation. A lot of it has been applied retrospectively, and I'm not sure we should be sacrificing our fundamental values and the rule of law in order to pursue these somewhat knee-jerk reactions that arguably won't really help very much in the war effort in Ukraine. Sanctions have a very poor record of success. We chatted a bit in the panel about other examples of countries that have been heavily sanctioned for long periods of time, for decades, in the case of Cuba, for example, and North Korea. And the autocratic leadership in those countries is just as entrenched, really, as it ever was, and yet we've just made everybody there poorer. And actually, in the case of the sanctions against Russia, at present, we're actually making ourselves poorer as well because of the impact it's having on energy markets. And I think those severe impacts on the prosperity of the citizens of our own country and of Russia needs to be taken very seriously.
And you have mentioned quite a few states that have been sanctioned in the past. What do you think the attitude of the United Kingdom, or for that matter the EU, should be when it comes to trade with autocratic regimes? Is it possible to continue trade, and we can hope that if goods cross borders, then soldiers won't? Or did that theory fail after the Ukrainian crisis?
I think I would still broadly be in favour of continuing to trade with these countries, but we have to draw a line between where we are pursuing free trade and where we are actually placing ourselves at risk from a security and geopolitical perspective. And, you know, supporters of free trade and free markets in general might, in good faith, disagree with where that line should be drawn. But I think it's very fair to say that there does come a point in time where, for example, supporting investment from China in our nuclear industry or in our telecommunications infrastructure, that may well cross the line from being beneficial from a free trade and openness perspective to being a threat from a geopolitical and security perspective.
Sure. Thanks for the great discussion, Victoria.
Thanks, Adam.
What do you have to say next? First off, let me say thank you for your current £10,000 contribution to the IEA internship. Now, as many of you already know, our program is a highly sought-after prospect for many young people throughout the entirety of the UK. And they do so much for us at the IEA. And so many of them go on to get high-profile jobs in politics, the financial sector, and some even become staff, such as Tom. But there are still so many young, bright-minded people out there within the UK who don't have the chance to work at the IEA because it's just so expensive to live and work in London. But by doubling your donation to £20,000, you'll be able to have these young, smart-minded people work at the IEA. And with your newfound donation, we will be able to keep the light of liberty and free markets shining in both the hearts and the minds of the future generations.
So we're here in Warsaw right now, and I'm happy to have been joined by Jonas Herby, who is a research consultant at CEPUS, our Danish member think tank of Epicenter. And we had a great discussion now on COVID lockdowns and the lessons that we have learned. And you are the author or the co-author of a famous paper, in some circles an infamous paper, about the impacts of lockdowns. So what is the main judgment now after 2 years? What is the assessment? Did lockdowns work, or were they a useless endeavor?
I'm not useless, but I would say that they didn't work nearly as well as we were promised. The effect is very limited. We have an updated version where basically the conclusion is the same as in the first version, that the effect of lockdowns is very limited, and it's very hard to argue that they compared to the cost of the lockdowns. So they probably shouldn't have been used at all.
And you're from Denmark, a very close and similar country to Sweden. Reasonably different attitudes in the first days of the pandemic, but in the second and third phases of the pandemic, basically Denmark also adopted a rather laissez-faire attitude. So if you compare just the Nordic regions, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland, three countries that are similar culturally, economically, do you see any major differences thanks to the different COVID results when it comes to excess death, when it comes to the economy, and when it comes to the educational output during the last 2 years?
So Sweden was famous for not locking down the society, and also they had a lot of death in the first part of especially in the first part of the pandemic, which there's research that shows that it's probably related to the Swedish winter holiday, which is in week 9, and that was the worst time to visit the Alps because there was an outbreak that we didn't know of. So when people got back home, they were infected, but still went to work and so on. And it wasn't until week 10 that it was realized that there was a pandemic down there. So they were unlucky, you could say, in the beginning of the pandemic, and therefore had a lot of excess mortality. But in the later part of the pandemic, they have fared fairly well, and do relative to other countries in Europe, they do really well. But compared to the other Scandinavian countries, they have more death, but it's nothing alarming. If you compare it to earlier flu pandemics, then it's in the same same magnitude. It's small, but not 10 times more, but maybe twice as severe as the flu pandemic.
So what does that actually mean for us in the future? So I'm afraid that it's probably not the last pandemic that we're going to see in our lifetime. If lockdowns are not an effective method to combat it, what should classical liberals and libertarians endorse when a similar scenario pops up in the future?
Yes, I think there's two lessons you can learn. First of all, Scandinavian countries just did well, as they do in whatever you look at, if it's health, economy, education, they do well because it's very well-functioning countries. So in a crisis, in a health crisis or pandemic crisis, I think it's fair to expect that Scandinavian countries will always do well because it's great countries. But one thing that Scandinavians are really good at is to observe new information, and I think that's really what works during a pandemic, because nobody wants to be sick and die from a pandemic. Most people don't want to infect their colleagues and friends and family, so people just need to be told how do you protect yourself and your family.
Told but not forced.
Exactly. So information is crucial, and I mean, they can always be better, but and I know the Danish information campaigns are best, but they have been really great at promoting information to the citizens, and I think that's what works. And Danes are fairly felt great at adopting new information, especially in times of crisis like this.
Sure.
So,
well, hopefully we're not going to encounter that anytime soon. But
hopefully
thank you
not.
very much.
Thank you.
So I'm here with Alexander Skouras, the president of CAFIM, our great partner think tank of Epicenter. And we had a great conversation about youth outreach. And classical liberal free market organizations sometimes do struggle when it comes to attracting a younger generation. But you guys have been incredibly successful. What is the method that CAFIM has adopted to reach out to younger audiences and get them involved with our programs?
Yeah, well, thank you, Adam, for the question. I mean, it's first of all, it's great to be able to learn from other organizations like the Institute of Economic Affairs, which has been leading the way in so many ways in youth outreach within our movement. So what we've done essentially is we have developed a robust internship program that helps us bring people closer not only to our organization, but to the ideas of freedom in general. And secondly, we have developed two more programs that are specifically designed for youth outreach. The first one is our Liberal Academy, which is a year-long course-focused program that teaches, contemporary or even deeper philosophical issues about freedom to interested or committed freedom lovers. And the second one is the Economics Olympiad, and this is something that I'm really, really excited about. The Economics Olympiad is a high school student competition nationwide that then has an international part. We do this in collaboration with our Czech fellow Atlas Network members, the Institute of Economic Education, INEV, based in Prague. And essentially, once we realized that people who are financially literate and economically literate are less prone to support populism and socialism, we realized that this is a unique area for a contribution for organizations like us. So what we did, we signed up on this project and we launched the Greek Economic Olympiad. And the first year we had tremendous success. We had 1,100 students from all over Greece participating in this competition. This year was the second year and we had more than 2,300 students. Now, it may not sound very impressive in the UK standard, right? But Greece is a country of only 10 million. So this is a very important percentage of the active student population that is being taught economics, learns more about them, even though the school system doesn't provide enough material and classes.
We can come into their place.
Yeah, so we found that hole in the marketplace of ideas, and we're putting sound economics in it.
So based on the short-term successes of these programs, how optimistic are you about the long-term impact of classical liberal thought? If you had to predict in 10 years' time, are we going to be closer to our ideals or further away?
Yeah, these are the tough questions that we need to be asking ourselves. And the way I've determined that our response will be in questions like that, is there's a good thing and there's a good answer and a bad answer. The bad answer is that we're currently losing.
Right.
We're losing the battle of ideas. The youth is being, attracted by illiberalism or socialism and different kinds of streams of thought that are very hostile to our worldview. The good thing is that there's nothing written in stone about where we will be in 10 years. It's up to us. It's up to our teams, our staff, our scholars, our donors, to make sure that we are not on the losing side of this battle. So it's up for grabs. The battle of ideas is here, it's alive, and it's more important than ever.
Let's win that.
Like many people, I commute into work. And like many people, I make decisions about how I choose to go to work. I can take the bus, I can take my car, I can take the train. And as a free individual, I'm free to make these choices all on my own. However, let's say if this was impossible, let's say the government said to me I had to take the bus to work, I lose my individualism, I lose my ability to make choices. Although this case is trivial, my friends, this is what the government wants. They want to rationalise you, they want to put you into their tidy tick boxes, and they want to take away your individuality. However, I have hope. For the IEA, our research and our outreach department, we are there to protect your freedoms. We are there to protect your choice. So if you want to live in a society where you're free to make your own decisions, then stand with me.
We're here in Warsaw and just finished an amazing panel discussion on tax competition. So I'm here with Matt Lesh, the head of public policy at the IEA, and he was talking a lot about the EU's and the OECD's idea of tax harmonization, setting a minimum corporate tax rate. What do you think about that idea? Is that something that free marketeers can endorse or pursue?
I think we should be really uncomfortable with the idea of international tax harmonization or even national tax harmonization. We should really, I think, espouse the benefits of tax competition, about the idea that you should, as a democracy, get to decide what are the appropriate levels of taxes for you, and as well as give people the freedom to move to a place with a lower tax amount of tax and potentially less spending or better public spending. Just think about the benefits that come from tax competition, the pressure it puts on to governments to make sure that their tax systems are efficient and that they're not overtaxing businesses and destroying entrepreneurialism in the process, as well as the pressures it puts on governments to ensure that they spend our money well. The fact that we limit their ability through tax competition to raise money means that when they do spend our money, they have to do it in a way that ensures it's getting the best value of our public money.
A lot of people are accusing free marketeers when it comes to endorsing tax competition of being unfair and benefiting big business. How do we communicate this? How can we make sure that tax competition is a positive connotation rather than a negative one?
Look, I think this is a difficulty that we need to tackle head on. We need to really make, I think, a moral case for the fact that you should be able to, as a country, decide what your tax is. I think this is really the central issue with the OECD's tax harmonization approach, is the fact that all the benefits that come out of different tax systems, different tax rules, we might not necessarily always like it, but things like R&D tax credits or the UK's patent box or the super deduction we have, all those kind of rules become impossible or at least very difficult when you harmonize taxes internationally. You lose that sovereignty, you lose that flexibility in policy making, and ultimately you don't end up actually raising that much more revenue. We should look at the fact that over the last few decades, the UK's corporate tax rate has gone down substantially from about 30% to about 19% today, and yet the amount of corporate tax revenue as a size of our economy has gone up over that period. So just because you lower the rate of tax doesn't mean you're getting less revenue, doesn't mean that the companies aren't being taxed. In fact, you can often, by having lower taxes, fairer taxes, ensure that you raise more revenue. So it's not about a case between fairness and taxing these big multinationals. It's about that broader sense of our right to decide our own tax levels.
Sure, and completely switching from the topic of tax competition, we are now here in Warsaw, just 400 kilometers away from the Russian border. If you have one message to send to President Putin, what would that message be without swear words?
I'm not allowed to use swear words?
No swear words.
There's a great Australian show called Summer Heights High where the character would say to the teacher very innocently, "Puck you." So I guess I'm going to say "Puck you" to Putin.
Matt Lesh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, if you enjoyed that conversation, why not watch one of these other videos? And while you're here, remember to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss out on a single IEA broadcast.